The silence in that hospital room felt sacred. Only the steady, impersonal beeping of the machines filled the air, like a cold countdown to something everyone knew was inevitable. Surrounded by cables, monitors, and the sterile glow of fluorescent light, lay Salem Dorn, just 7 years old. His skin was pale, his body fragile, and his gaze lost somewhere far beyond the white ceiling. Time had slowed around his bed, as if even fate itself was waiting for the final breath. The doctors had stopped offering hope. It was just a matter of days now, maybe even hours. Salem no longer reacted much. His gray-blue eyes, reminiscent of an overcast Montana sky, no longer followed voices or movements. He simply breathed, shallow, weak, and barely there. His body refused to fight, and even his parents, seated silently beside his bed, seemed to have accepted the unthinkable, that their battle was coming to a quiet end. The only thing that still brought the faintest flicker of light into Salem's empty stare was a single name, Jasper. And on that heavy gray morning, just as everything felt like it was falling apart, the door slowly creaked open. Through the crisp smell of antiseptic and the sterile routine of the hospital entered a small, out-of-place figure, a black saddled German shepherd puppy. His coat was rich, dark as midnight, with subtle caramel markings on his paws and muzzle that caught the light just enough to be noticed. His deep, intelligent brown eyes scanned the room, not with confusion, but with a quiet sense of purpose. His name was Jasper, and he knew exactly where he was going. With calm, sure steps, Jasper padded toward the hospital bed and gently rested his chin on Salem's thin arm. Then, with precise tenderness, he lifted a small black paw and placed it right over the boy's pale, unmoving hand. It was a moment so powerful that Soraya Lang, the nurse standing in the doorway, stopped breathing. Salem blinked slowly, deliberately. His fingers twitched, then slowly curled around the pup's paw, and for the first time in weeks, his voice broke through the silence. "You really came?" Outside the room, Dr. Evander Rowe, the neurologist in charge, stood frozen behind the observation glass. A man of science and logic, hardened by years of treating terminal cases, suddenly felt the weight of something he couldn't explain. He rushed in, eyes locked on the monitor. The boy's vitals, once erratic and faint, were now stabilizing. It made no sense. Nothing in his textbooks or experience accounted for this, but it was happening right in front of him. And the trigger was a dog, a puppy, a creature they had labeled merely emotional support, but now he was clearly something far more. What no one in that room could have known was that something far greater had just been awakened. That unspoken bond between Jasper and Salem, though silent but powerful, had only just begun. And what that little black saddle shepherd would do in the days ahead would challenge science, move souls, and bring even the most hardened hearts in that hospital to tears. This story is just getting started, and what comes next will truly move you. So hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. We're on our way to 100,000 subscribers, and with you here, we'll get there. The hospital staff tried to play it off as coincidence, a brief improvement, a surge of adrenaline, maybe even a final moment of clarity before the end. But none of those explanations felt right. Not to Dr. Rowe, not to Soraya Lang, and especially not to Salem's parents, who saw something shift in their son the moment Jasper touched him. That night, for the first time in weeks, Salem didn't cry in his sleep. He didn't moan from pain. He simply rested peacefully, and Jasper never left his side. The hospital had never allowed an animal to stay overnight before, but the head nurse signed off quietly, and the security team looked the other way. Jasper curled up on the bed, his body pressed against Salem's ribs, listening to each shallow breath like it was sacred. At some point in the early hours, Soraya tiptoed in and found them asleep, boy and dog, heartbeats sinking beneath the humming of machines. She stood there for several minutes, hand over her mouth as if afraid to break the spell. The next morning brought something no one expected. Salem asked for food. His voice was still weak, but it was there, clear and deliberate. He wanted applesauce. Then he asked if Jasper could stay with him longer. Then something even more astonishing. He sat up, not without effort, not without help, but it was the first time his muscles obeyed him in over a month. Dr. Rowe entered in a rush, heart pounding, torn between disbelief and awe. We need to run new labs, new scans. Something's changed, he muttered. But as much as science tried to catch up, it couldn't explain the simple truth. Every moment Jasper spent with Salem, the boy seemed more alive. Jasper didn't bark, didn't jump, didn't distract. He simply stayed close, pressing his body against the boy as if pouring something invisible into him. And Salem, who once stared blankly at the walls, now looked at Jasper with wonder. He whispered to the dog things no one else could hear. Secrets, promises, fears. They were speaking in a language beyond understanding. Salem's mother, Nida, sat at the edge of the bed that evening, brushing the boy's hair back from his forehead. She watched Jasper's breathing rise and fall in rhythm with her son's and whispered, "He's giving you something, isn't he?" Salem nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on Jasper. "He's holding me here," he said, "like I was floating away and he caught me." The word sent chills down Nida's spine. She didn't know whether to feel joy or terror. Outside the room, as night fell over the quiet hospital, Dr. Rose stared again at the boy's updated chart. Improved oxygen levels, lower inflammation markers, restored reflexes. All impossible, and yet there they were. He exhaled slowly, then looked down the hallway where other terminal cases lay waiting in silence. "What if this dog is more than emotional support?" he muttered under his breath. He didn't realize Soraya was standing behind him. "Doctor, I think this is just the beginning," she whispered. Word began to spread quietly through the hospital corridors, not through official reports or medical briefings, but in whispered conversations between nurses during shift changes, in lingering glances between orderlies, and in the stunned silence of staff who walked past room 214 and saw what no one could believe. Salem Dorn, the boy they had gently prepared to lose, was not only awake, he was smiling, and always at his side, like a guardian stitched to his soul, was a black saddle shepherd pup, Jasper. The changes weren't subtle anymore. Salem's skin had begun to regain color. His fingertips no longer looked bluish and cold. He could sit upright for longer, even laugh softly at Jasper's tilted head expressions. Every time someone entered the room, their eyes would immediately land on the dog lying calmly next to Salem, never barking, never distracted. His presence wasn't loud, but it was heavy like gravity. It was as if Jasper was anchoring the boy to the world, breath by breath. But not everyone welcomed the growing legend of the miracle dog. Dr. Calloway, the hospital's administrator, was a practical man, uncomfortable with anything that couldn't be measured or built. "It's a placebo effect," he insisted during a tense staff meeting. "The boy is responding to emotional stimulus, nothing more." But the other doctors didn't agree so easily, especially not Dr. Rowe, who had spent countless nights reviewing Salem's test results, watching impossible data stack up. "Placebos don't rebuild mitochondrial function," he said quietly, not taking his eyes off the latest scan. Late one evening, as snow began falling softly outside the hospital windows, Salem asked a question that made Nida freeze. "Mom, do you think Jasper was supposed to find me?" She turned toward him, brushing her hand over his cheek. "I think maybe you were supposed to find each other," she said. Salem didn't respond right away. He looked down at Jasper, resting his head on the boy's lap, eyes half closed but alert. "Sometimes at night, I feel like he's dreaming with me, like we're going somewhere together." The room fell silent, the weight of those words hanging between mother and son. That night, Soraya sat outside the room after her shift ended. She couldn't bring herself to leave. She stared to the narrow glass pane in the door, watching Salem sleep with Jasper's paw resting lightly on his chest. A thought she'd been pushing away finally surfaced, unwilling to stay quiet. What if this dog isn't just helping Salem heal? What if he's the reason he's still here? That idea should have scared her. Instead, it filled her with something dangerously close to hope. Meanwhile, deep in the hospital's radiology wing, Dr. Rowe pulled up 2 sets of brain scans, one from 3 weeks ago, one from that morning. He rubbed his temples and leaned forward, heart pounding. The newest scan showed neural activity. Areas that had previously shown near complete inactivity were now lighting up. It was as if someone had turned the power back on. "This isn't supposed to happen," he whispered, and then almost involuntarily, he looked over his shoulder as if afraid someone or something was watching. The hospital, once a place of quiet resignation, had begun to hum with something different, something no one dare name. Patients who had once been silent were asking questions. Nurses lingered a little longer in the hallway outside room 214. And still no one could explain what was happening to Salem Dorn. He had been slipping away. Everyone knew it. And now, with each passing day, he looked more alive. But the doctors weren't the only ones noticing the change. Late one night, while the halls were empty and the overhead lights dimmed to a soft blue, Nida woke to the sound of her son talking. Not to her, not to himself, but to Jasper. She opened her eyes and sat up slowly in the recliner beside the bed. Salem's voice was low, soft, like someone confessing a dream. "I see you in my dreams," he said. "Not like this, not a puppy. You're bigger and you talk." Nida's breath caught in her chest. She wanted to believe it was just a child's imagination, but something in his tone felt different. As if he wasn't inventing, he was remembering. The next morning, Salem's physical therapist stood frozen as he watched the boy walk on his own for the first time in nearly 3 months. It was slow, shaky, but his legs moved, his muscles responded. "That's not possible," he whispered. Behind him, Dr. Rowe closed his eyes and muttered under his breath, "It shouldn't be, but it is." The team was documenting everything now: blood work, reflex tests, cognitive exams. All showed the same unexplainable trajectory. Salem was improving at a rate that defied every medical expectation. Yet, with every gain came something stranger. Jasper had started acting different at night. He would sit at the edge of Salem's bed, staring at the door, unmoving, alert, as if guarding against something no one else could see. His ears would twitch at sounds that weren't there. Sometimes, in the silence, his body would stiffen and a low growl would rumble from his throat, directed at nothing. Maybe he's just protecting Salem, Soraya offered one evening. But even she didn't fully believe it. The growls weren't a fear. They were warnings. That week, a janitor on the night shift quit suddenly after claiming he saw Jasper standing in the hallway, motionless, staring at him with eyes too human. Security footage showed nothing. No Jasper, no shadow, just an empty hallway. But the janitor's terrified face as he handed in his badge said enough. Whispers started among the night staff. Some began to avoid room 214. Others left small notes or charms near the door. Old habits inherited from grandmothers who believed in things science never dared touch. Back in the room, unaware of the growing fear outside, Salem stroked Jasper's head gently. "You're not just a dog, are you?" he asked one evening, his voice barely a whisper. Jasper didn't move. He just looked up at Salem with those deep, ancient eyes and blinked. And in that blink, Salem felt something stir in his chest, a memory he didn't recognize, a warmth. Or was it something else? He couldn't explain it, but in that moment, he knew whatever was happening wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. It happened just after 2 a.m. The hospital was asleep, hallways dark, nurses at their stations half alert, in the lull between alarms. In room 214, Nida dozed in the chair beside Salem's bed, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Calm now. Stronger, Salem breathed calmly in his sleep. At the foot of the bed sat Jasper, still upright, eyes fixed on the corner of the room. He hadn't moved in over an hour. His ears were twitching, his body tense. Something was coming, something no one else could feel. Suddenly, Salem jolted awake, gasping, clutching at his chest. Machines beeped wildly. Nida jumped to her feet. "Salem!" He didn't respond. His eyes were wide, unblinking, staring into the same corner as Jasper. And then, in a voice filled with something far older than fear, he whispered, "It's here." Nida looked toward the corner, saw nothing. But Jasper stood now, growling low, stepping between Salem and the empty space like a soldier bracing for battle. The room turned cold. Not the kind of chill from air vents or malfunctioning thermostats. It was thick, heavy, the kind that sinks into your bones. Salem began to tremble violently, his body seizing in a way that was neither medical nor natural. Alarms blared. Nurses came running. Dr. Rowe arrived moments later, eyes locked on the boy convulsing in the bed. He shouted for meds, for vitals, for anything, but Jasper would not move aside. He stood planted, fur raised, teeth bare at the corner. One nurse tried to pull him back, but Jasper snapped, not to bite, but to warn. He knew what they couldn't see. And then it stopped. Salem fell back onto the bed. The alarms went silent. Every machine leveled out. The tremors vanished. The chill lifted. And Jasper, still panting, climbed onto bed and laid himself across the boy's chest, paws stretched over his heart, ears still alert. No one spoke. No one breathed. Finally, Salem opened his eyes. "He fought it," he said, voice shaking. "He kept it from taking me." The room remained frozen in place, stunned. But inside, Dr. Rowe felt something crack. A lifelong belief, once built on evidence and certainty, began to fall apart. He approached slowly, eyes locked on the pup. "You're not just helping him recover, are you?" he whispered. Jasper turned his head, met the doctor's gaze with something far too intelligent to ignore, and blinked once, slow and deliberate. Something deep inside Dr. Rowe shifted. Not fear, not disbelief. Reverence. Did you feel that chill too? Drop a comment below and tell us what you think Jasper saw that night. Was it something from another world? Or was he guarding Salem from something only dogs can sense? We want to hear your theory. The next morning, the hospital was not the same. Every staff member who had witnessed what happened in room 214 walked differently. Slower, quieter, more careful. Word had spread, but not in a sensational way. It was passed in whispers with wide eyes and furrowed brows, like people trying to make sense of something sacred and terrifying at once. Salem was alive, more stable than ever. But no one could forget the way the temperature had dropped, the look in his eyes when he said, "It's here," and most of all, the way Jasper had stood guard against something no one could see. Dr. Rowe sat alone in his office, the blinds closed, the lights off. The scans lay on the desk in front of him. He'd gone over them again and again. Every metric, every chart, every biological signal said the same impossible thing. Salem's cellular regeneration had not only returned, it had accelerated. There was no therapy, no drug, no treatment in existence that could cause this, not in a case like his. And then there was the fact that Jasper's presence always preceded the improvements. The doctor leaned forward, staring at a photo of Jasper on his monitor. "What are you?" he whispered. Meanwhile, Salem was changing in ways no one could explain. He was still the same boy, gentle, quiet, thoughtful, but now there was something deeper in his gaze. His words had more weight, his silences more meaning. At one point, he looked up at his mother and said, "He doesn't sleep like we do." She blinked, unsure what he meant. Salem smiled faintly. "When I dream, sometimes I see things through his eyes." Nida didn't know what to say, so she simply held him closer. But in her heart, the fear returned. Whatever was healing her son wasn't just physical. That afternoon, a chaplain who had been visiting other patients requested to pray over Salem. As he stepped into the room, Jasper lifted his head slowly. The man stopped mid-step, his voice catching in his throat. "Those eyes," he murmured. "They're ancient." No one responded. He placed a trembling hand on Salem's shoulder and said a simple prayer, but his fingers were shaking the whole time. As he left the room, he turned to Dr. Rowe in the hallway. "That dog is not just a creature of this world, and I don't say that lightly." That night, as the snowstorm picked up outside and winds howled against the windows, Salem sat awake in bed, staring out into the dark. Jasper was beside him, as always, alert but calm. "It tried to come back last night," Salem whispered. Nida sat up, eyes wide. "What did it look like?" she asked. "The thing that was trying to take me," Salem replied. "But it couldn't get past Jasper this time. He's stronger now." Then, without another word, he placed his hand gently over the dog's head and whispered, "Thank you," in that silence. With the machines humming softly in the background, Jasper closed his eyes, but he did not sleep. He watched, always. The hospital began to shift in ways no one could explain. It wasn't in the charts or the lab reports, but in the air, a heaviness that settled at nightfall. A pressure in the chest made staff pause before entering certain wings. Some rooms felt colder than they should have been. Lights flickered more often, and machines glitched without warning. And always, When something strange occurred, it was somewhere near room 214. The nurses began taking turns avoiding the night shift in that hallway. Some whispered that they'd seen shadows where there were none. A few claimed they heard growling, even when the door was closed and Jasper was asleep. Dr. Evander Rowe, once the hospital's strongest skeptic, now kept a private log. He didn't tell anyone, not officially, but he began recording every moment Jasper reacted to something unseen, every time Salem had a sudden spike in energy, every time a medical anomaly happened. Jasper had looked toward the same corner of the room, as if tracking something, as if guarding against it. Rowe was no longer chasing an explanation. He was watching a pattern, and it terrified him. Salem, however, seemed at peace. His health was still fragile, but his eyes no longer held that distant fog. His spirit was awake, aware, and strangely mature for a 7-year-old. One morning, he told Nida, "I don't think Jasper came from a shelter." She froze. "What do you mean?" Salem tilted his head thoughtfully. "I think he was sent." Nida didn't respond. She just pulled the blanket tighter around her son, even though she was the one who suddenly felt cold. That same day, a nurse named Bridget, new to the staff, entered room 214 to check vitals. She smiled gently at Salem, then turned to greet Jasper. But the moment her eyes met his, she stopped. Her face went pale, and she took one slow step back. "What is it?" Salem asked. Bridget shook her head quickly, tried to recover. "Sorry, just felt dizzy for a second." But later in the break room, she confided in Sarah. "I looked into his eyes, and for a second, I saw fire. Not like danger, like a memory, but it wasn't mine." That night, the security guard doing rounds saw something he would never forget. Passing by room 214, he glanced in through the window and froze. Jasper was standing on the bed, facing the wall, his ears up, his tail stiff, and his eyes glowing with a faint golden shimmer. Salem was asleep, undisturbed, but Jasper didn't move. He just stared. The guard backed away, heart pounding, unsure if he'd imagined it. He reported nothing. He didn't want to be the next one labeled crazy. Inside the room, Salem slowly opened his eyes, as if he'd heard something. He didn't speak, just looked at Jasper, alert, unmoving, and whispered, "You see it too, don't you?" The snowstorm outside had turned violent, wind howling through the hospital's old windows. Distant branches scratched against the glass like fingers trying to claw their way in. Inside room 214, the light above Salem's bed began to flicker. It wasn't the first time. For the last 3 nights, the flickering had started around the same time, 3:12 a.m. Every night, Jasper would rise from his sleep, ears forward, body tense, staring at the same empty corner of the room. That night, something was different. The air was thick, almost hard to breathe. The monitors around Salem's bed lagged for a moment, screams freezing before catching up. Nida was asleep, exhausted, her body draped in a blanket beside her son's bed. But Salem was awake, not scared, not panicked, just watching. He knew it was coming again. And Jasper, already standing on the mattress, muscles trembling under his black saddle coat, let out the softest growl, a sound that was more warning than threat. Suddenly, the temperature dropped. Frost formed on the inside of the windows. The light bulb above hissed, then blew. Darkness flooded the room. And in that moment, a sound broke the silence. A deep, guttural whisper, as if something ancient had spoken just beneath the floor. Salem sat upright. He wasn't shaking. He was listening. Jasper stood taller now, directly between the boy and the corner, fur raised along his back. His growl turned into a snarl. And then he lunged. To anyone watching, it would have looked like the dog had jumped at nothing. But Salem saw it, just for a second. A shape darker than the room itself, tall, thin, twisted. It recoiled when Jasper attacked, as if struck by something it couldn't comprehend. Salem's head snapped back, his chest arched upward, and a loud ringing filled his ears. The machine screamed in alarm. Lights down the hallway flickered in unison. Staff rushed toward the room, but when they opened the door, the air slammed against them like a wall. Then, as quickly as it began, it ended. Lights steadied, machines calmed. The frost on the windows melted instantly. Jasper stood still, breathing hard, one paw bleeding slightly. Salem collapsed backward, unconscious but breathing. Dr. Rowe, who arrived moments later, stood in stunned silence, watching the heart monitor stabilize once more. That wasn't a seizure, he muttered. That was a fight. He knelt beside Jasper, running a hand gently over the dog's flank. What are you protecting him from? He whispered. But Jasper didn't answer. He just stared at the corner, eyes burning with quiet defiance. Outside the room, Soraya had her hand over her mouth, trembling. Behind her, a nurse whispered, "That dog's not here by chance." And deep inside the room, as silence settled again, Salem slowly opened his eyes and said the words that would change everything. "I know its name now." The following morning, the hospital felt different, quieter, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Word had spread. Salem had spoken after the attack. But what chilled those who heard it wasn't just the boy's survival. It was what he said, "I know its name now." No one dared ask him what that name was. Not even Dr. Rowe. Not yet, because somehow they all knew once it was said aloud, there'd be no turning back. Nida sat at her son's bedside, holding his hand tightly, while Jasper rested at his feet, bandaged but alert. Salem was pale, his energy lower than before, but his voice was calm, steady. "It used to come in my sleep," he told her quietly, "but it's been following me for longer than that, since I got sick." He looked her in the eyes, and in his young, trembling voice he added, "It didn't want to kill me. It wanted to take me somewhere else." Nida's heart sank. She wanted to dismiss it, to call it imagination, but deep down, she believed every word. Later that day, Dr. Rowe sat with Salem alone. He placed the boy's latest scans on the table. Improvements that bordered on miraculous. But that wasn't why he was there. "You said you know its name?" Dr. Rowe asked gently. Salem nodded. The doctor hesitated, then asked, "Can you tell me?" There was a long pause, then, in a voice that barely rose above a whisper, Salem spoke a name no one in the room had ever heard before. But the moment it was spoken, Jasper let out a low, haunted growl, and the lights dimmed for just a second. It wasn't a name from this world, and Dr. Rowe knew instantly it had power. That night, Jasper did not sleep. He stood at the foot of Salem's bed, body still, gaze locked on a window. Outside, the wind picked up, and in the darkness, something moved past the glass. A shape, a shadow, pausing just long enough to be seen. Jasper didn't flinch. Salem opened his eyes, saw it too, and whispered, "It knows I remember." Jasper turned his head toward the boy, then stepped off the bed. It was time. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't going to wait any longer. And in that moment, Salem understood what had to happen. He wasn't just a boy who was being healed. He was being protected for a reason. The storm outside had broken by dawn. Sunlight pushed through the clouds for the first time in days, casting soft gold over the snow-covered ground. Inside room 214, everything was still except for Jasper. He stood at the center of the room, facing the window, his ears up, alert. Something had changed in the air. Salem was awake, sitting up, his hand resting on Jasper's back. "It's time, isn't it?" he said softly. Jasper didn't move, but somehow Salem already knew the answer. Nida stood beside them, silent tears running down her cheeks. She could feel it too, not fear, but something deeper, a closing, a letting go. And then, to everyone's surprise, he closed his eyes, breathed in slowly, and whispered the name of the thing that had haunted him. But this time, he didn't whisper it in fear. He said it with strength, with finality. And in that instant, Jasper turned and walked toward the door. Not to leave, but to face whatever had lingered in the corners of this world for too long. What happened next, no one could fully explain. The lights flickered once, then steadied. The machines around Salem didn't beep erratically. They went silent, not in death, but in peace. Jasper let out a single bark, sharp and commanding, and it echoed to the floor like a shockwave. The pressure in the room lifted, and then it was over. The presence was gone. Whatever had been attached to Salem, whatever had stalked him through his illness and fear, was gone, banished, not by medicine, not by prayers, but by the quiet, unwavering protection of a dog who had never stopped watching. Dr. Rowe arrived moments later, breathless, expecting chaos but finding only calm. He looked at Salem, fully awake and smiling. He looked at Jasper, who now lay down quietly, his breathing deep and content. "It's finished," Salem said. The doctor stepped back, unable to speak. He had seen things no scientist could explain, but in that silence he understood. Jasper hadn't just saved Salem's life. He had defended his soul. 1 week later, Salem was discharged from a hospital. A boy who had once been given days to live, now walking out under his own strength. Jasper walked beside him, proud, his tail swaying gently. Nurses lined the hallway. Some clapped. Others cried. Dr. Rowe placed a hand on Nida's shoulder and said, "We'll never understand it, but I believe it now. That dog didn't just show up," he said. "He was sent." Outside, the snow melted under the soft spring sun, and as Salem looked down at Jasper, he smiled and whispered, "I'm still here because you stayed." If the story touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. The bond between a boy and his dog proved that Rayall love can conquer even the unseen. Share the story.